My brother and his wife moved into our parents' house and started treating me like their live-in maid. I was living with my parents in a small Midwest town, working part-time and putting aside money for nursing school. When our parents, Thomas and Marjorie, left for a long trip to care for my mom's sick sister, I thought things would stay calm. But Clint, my older brother, and his wife Sierra said they needed a place to stay while saving money, so they moved in. At first, I didn't mind. I thought it would be nice to have company and maybe even grow closer to them. It didn't take long for the mood in the house to change. Sierra began handing me chores as if I worked for her. She would point out dust on a shelf, a dish in the sink, or laundry not folded fast enough. Clint stood beside her, agreeing with everything she said, telling me I should earn my keep. Every time I called my parents to vent, they were distracted and busy, and I could tell they weren't paying attention. Slowly, I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. The small things turned into bigger humiliations. Sierra began inviting her friends over and told me to serve snacks and clean up afterward. Clint joined in, joking in front of their guests that I was just the maid. Soon, they made me move my things to the basement, saying Sierra needed an office upstairs. My room turned into a cold, damp corner while they lived comfortably above me. I swallowed my pride, but inside, I felt humiliated and trapped. Then came the lies and betrayal. They started accusing me of eating too much of the groceries, even hiding food from me like I was stealing. Sierra went through my room, mocking my thrift store clothes. One night, I overheard them whispering about convincing our parents that I should move out so they could stay in the house rent-free. That's when I realized this wasn't just about chores. They were scheming to push me out of my own home. The breaking point came after a dinner party. I wasn't even invited to sit down and eat, yet Sierra ordered me to clean up after everyone. For the first time, I said no. Clint blew up, blocking me from going upstairs and shouting that Mom and Dad already thought I was lazy. That's when I knew they had been lying to our parents behind my back. I decided right then that I wouldn't let them win. I started gathering proof. I recorded Sierra barking orders and belittling me. I took pictures of the mess she left behind after parties. One day, I stumbled across papers showing Clint and Sierra had been taking money from my parents' account under the excuse of house expenses. I saved it all quietly, waiting for the moment to strike. That moment came when my parents returned home earlier than expected. Clint and Sierra immediately jumped into their act, trying to make me look lazy and ungrateful. They even showed fake evidence, hoping to get me kicked out. I kept my mouth shut, letting them dig themselves deeper. Then, at dinner, when they demanded I move out, I calmly played the recordings and laid out the photos and documents. The look on my parents' faces was something I'll never forget. Anger, disappointment, heartbreak, all directed at Clint and Sierra. Sierra tried to deny everything, but the evidence was too clear. My parents kicked them out of the house that same night. Clint screamed at me, calling me names, but I didn't respond. For once, the truth was louder than his voice. After they left, the house felt like home again. My parents apologized for not believing me and promised to support me as I worked toward nursing school. Months later, I heard Clint and Sierra were struggling, moving from place to place. I didn't celebrate, but I didn't feel sorry either. They wanted me gone, but instead they lost everything. At first, things seemed normal with Clint and Sierra in the house, but slowly, the atmosphere began to change. Sierra started giving me tasks around the house, pretending it was all about keeping things organized. It wasn't simple reminders, it was demands. She would hand me a list of things to do, like vacuuming twice a day, scrubbing bathrooms that weren't even dirty, and rearranging closets she had already gone through herself. The way she said it made me feel like I was a child being scolded rather than someone sharing the same home. Whenever I cooked, she would find something to pick apart. If the food had too much salt or not enough flavor, she made sure to tell me in front of Clint. If I cleaned, she would run her fingers along the counter or the table, looking for dust, and when she found even the smallest speck, she would sigh loudly and shake her head. It didn't stop there. She even commented on my clothes, saying they looked cheap or unflattering. Each remark cut a little deeper, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the constant criticism weighed on me. Clint was no help. In fact, he encouraged it. Instead of standing up for me, he stood beside Sierra every single time. If I got upset, he told me I was too sensitive. If I tried to defend myself, he said I should be grateful to live under the same roof and that I needed to earn my keep. It hurt hearing that from my own brother, especially when I was already working part-time and helping out with bills whenever I could. I wasn't freeloading, but in their eyes, I was nothing more than someone who didn't belong unless I obeyed their rules. I tried to talk to my parents about it during their trip. I thought maybe they could talk some sense into Clint or at least remind him that it was still their house. But whenever I called, they sounded rushed and distracted. My mom was overwhelmed caring for her sister, and my dad's focus was completely on supporting her. They didn't hear the strain in my voice, or maybe they didn't want to. Either way, I realized I couldn't rely on them to step in. As the days went on, I felt myself disappearing in the very place I had always called home. The rooms felt less familiar. The warmth I once felt in the house seemed to fade, and I started walking on eggshells just to avoid another fight or insult. It was as if I was no longer a daughter or a sister, but an unwanted guest, someone who had overstayed her welcome. The strange part was, I hadn't gone anywhere. It was Clint and Sierra who had moved in, yet somehow they made me feel like I was the outsider. The shift was slow, but it was clear. Every morning when I woke up, I felt less and less like myself, and more like a stranger in my own home. It didn't take long before Sierra began treating the house like it belonged to her. She started inviting her friends over almost every week. These weren't quiet visits. They were loud gatherings where laughter, gossip, and music filled the rooms late into the night. Every time, she would call me out from wherever I was and tell me to bring out snacks, refill drinks, or clear the table. I never agreed to play host, yet somehow it became expected of me. If I hesitated, she would give me a sharp look, the kind that said I had no choice. Clint was no better. Instead of stopping her, he used these moments to embarrass me. Whenever Sierra's friends were around, he turned me into the punchline of his jokes. He would laugh and say things like, "Don't mind her, she's just the maid around here," as if I wasn't even part of the family. His friends chuckled awkwardly and Sierra smirked, clearly enjoying the show. Each time it happened, my cheeks burned with shame, but I bit my tongue. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. The worst came when Sierra announced that she needed a proper home office. Without asking me, she and Clint decided that the room I'd been using upstairs would be better for her. One afternoon, I came home to find my belongings already packed into boxes, sitting by the basement door. My bed, dresser, and clothes were shoved into the basement as if I didn't matter. When I confronted them, Clint shrugged and said it was only fair since Sierra was working full-time from home while I was just working part-time. Sierra added that the upstairs room was wasted on me. The basement was damp and cold, with barely enough light from a small window near the ceiling. My old room had felt cozy and familiar, but the basement felt like being buried. I lay awake at night listening to footsteps overhead, knowing they were in the room that used to be mine. I wanted to fight back, to demand my space, but I knew I couldn't win against both of them. The truth was, I didn't have enough money saved to move out yet. Rent on my own would have drained me before I even got to nursing school, and they knew it. That's why they could treat me this way, because I had no other choice. Every day became a cycle of doing chores, keeping quiet, and swallowing the humiliation. When Sierra's friends came over, I forced a polite smile while serving drinks. When Clint made another joke at my expense, I pretended not to hear. And when I lay in the dark basement, listening to the laughter upstairs, I reminded myself that this was only temporary. I had to survive it, no matter how small and invisible they tried to make me feel. Even so, the weight of it pressed harder each day. I was trapped in my own home, surrounded by people who wanted me to feel less than human. It wasn't enough that Clint and Sierra treated me like a servant. Soon, they began to twist things in ways that made me doubt myself. Food started disappearing from the kitchen. At first, I thought I was just imagining it, but then Sierra accused me of eating too much. She would open the fridge in front of Clint and point out items that were gone, saying, "See? She's eating for free while we pay for everything." The truth was, I had barely touched anything except what I bought with my own money. But no matter what I said, they acted like I was lying. Sometimes I caught them hiding snacks in their room, but when I brought it up, they denied it and made me feel crazy for even suggesting it. Sierra didn't stop at the kitchen. One day I came back to the basement and found my closet door slightly open. My clothes were out of place, and some of my things had been moved around. It didn't take long to realize she had been snooping through my belongings. Later, she made cruel comments about what she found. She laughed about my thrift store dresses, mocking the colors and calling them outdated. She even joked to Clint about how she couldn't believe I wore hand-me-down-looking shoes. It wasn't just criticism anymore. It was a way to strip me of dignity, to make me feel small for not having as much as they did. The worst moment came one night when I was heading upstairs quietly to grab some water. Their voices drifted from the living room, low but sharp. I paused on the stairs, and what I heard made my stomach drop. Sierra was saying how perfect it would be if I moved out for good. She suggested telling our parents that I was lazy, ungrateful, and making life harder for them. Clint agreed, adding that if I left, they could convince Mom and Dad to let them stay in the house permanently without paying rent. I stood frozen, listening as my own brother plotted against me with his wife. The house that was supposed to be a safe place had turned into a trap, and the person I should have been able to trust the most was planning to throw me out. In that moment, everything clicked: the chores, the jokes, the food accusations, even moving me to the basement. It wasn't random. They had been slowly building a case against me, hoping to push me out while looking like the victims themselves. I went back downstairs quietly, my chest tight and my hands shaking. The betrayal stung more than all the insults combined. Sierra's cruelty was expected, but Clint's voice agreeing with her cut deeper than I could bear. This wasn't just siblings fighting. This was my brother siding with someone else to erase me from our own family home. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, realizing I wasn't just unwanted. I was being pushed out on purpose. And no matter how much it hurt, I couldn't let them win. The night that changed everything started with another one of Sierra's gatherings. The house was full of people I didn't know, laughter echoing through the rooms, plates stacked high with food that I hadn't even been offered. I stayed in the basement, trying to keep out of the way, my stomach growling from the smell of roast chicken and fresh bread drifting downstairs. When the party finally began to wind down, I thought maybe I could sneak into the kitchen and grab something for myself. But before I could, Sierra appeared at the top of the basement stairs, her voice sharp as ever. She ordered me to come up and clean. I looked at the messy dining room, glasses tipped over, plates crusted with food, crumbs all across the table. Everyone else was leaving, smiling, and thanking Sierra for the night, while I was being called in like a servant to scrub up after them. Something in me snapped. For the first time, I shook my head and said no. My voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. Sierra's face twisted with disbelief, as if I'd committed a crime by refusing. Within seconds, her voice rose, screaming that I was ungrateful and lazy, that I didn't respect her or the house. Clint rushed over, siding with her immediately. He yelled at me, his voice booming so loud the last of their guests turned to stare. My hands trembled, but I stood my ground, repeating that I wasn't going to clean up after a party I hadn't even been allowed to join. The shouting went back and forth until Sierra stormed out of the room, slamming a door behind her. Clint stayed behind, his face red, breathing hard. When I tried to walk past him to head upstairs to my room in the basement, he stepped in front of me. His shoulders squared, blocking the hallway like a wall. "Don't forget," he hissed. "Mom and Dad already think you're lazy. They know how useless you've been here." The words hit me harder than his body blocking the way. In that instant, I realized what had been happening all along. The calls I made to my parents where they brushed off my worries, the little comments they made about me needing to be more helpful. It wasn't coming from them. Clint and Sierra had been feeding them lies, painting me as someone who did nothing, someone who wasn't worth defending. My parents hadn't been cold on purpose. They had been manipulated. I stared at my brother, feeling something inside me shift. Up until then, I had swallowed the insults, taken the humiliation, and kept quiet because I thought eventually things would get better. But this moment showed me that they never would. Clint and Sierra wanted me out, and they would keep twisting the story until they got what they wanted. I didn't scream back at him. I didn't push or argue. I just stepped aside and let the silence hang heavy between us. Inside, though, my mind was racing. If they wanted to lie, then I would use the truth. If they wanted to humiliate me, then I would make sure their own actions came back to destroy them. That night, lying in the cold basement, I made a decision. I wasn't going to play the victim anymore. I would gather what I needed, stay quiet, and wait. Revenge wouldn't come through shouting or fighting. It would come through patience. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. I knew exactly what I had to do. I started collecting proof quietly, because yelling would only make them hide things better. My first step was simple. I used my phone to record when Sierra was cruel. I set the phone near the kitchen or living room and left it out of sight. The recordings caught her tone and exact words, the way she ordered me and mocked me. Hearing those clips later made the insults impossible to deny. I labeled each file with the date and a short note so I could find the right one when I needed it. Next, I began taking pictures. After gatherings, I walked through the rooms snapping photos of glasses, plates, and overturned chairs. The images showed who had actually left the mess. They also showed where I had been blamed for clutter I never made. I made sure to capture small details: crumbs on a counter, grease on a pan, a beer bottle on the porch, things that proved the truth without needing my words. I stored the pictures in a hidden folder on my phone and backed them up to a cloud account only I could access. Paperwork turned out to be the most important discovery. One afternoon, I was helping clean up a pile of mail and noticed envelopes from the bank with notes on them. I opened them when no one was around and found records that did not match what Clint and Sierra claimed. I saw withdrawals for home repairs that had no receipts and transfers labeled in ways that looked like excuses. My heart pounded as I copied the pages and photographed bank statements on my phone. I also found invoices for services that didn't seem to happen and receipts with amounts that were larger than they should be. I was careful with everything. I did not confront them or announce what I was doing. Instead, I moved slowly and kept the evidence in multiple places. I printed a few important pages and put them in a small envelope I hid in the bottom of a seldom-used box. I changed passwords on the accounts I controlled and wrote notes about where each piece of proof was stored. That way, if someone searched my phone, they would not easily find the files. I also made copies of the most damning recordings and photos and emailed them to myself with an old address my family did not know I used. I dated each email, so the timeline would be clear. The emails acted like a timestamp showing when I had these items. I felt strange doing it, like a spy, but it gave me confidence. Collecting evidence took time. I learned to be patient, to wait for clear moments and avoid rash moves. Each recording, each photo, and every paper added up into a pattern. The pile of proof started to look like a map that would show the truth in one clear picture. By the time I had enough, I felt ready. I had built a record that could not be explained away with jokes or excuses. I kept it safe and waited for the right moment to use it. When the day came to show it to my parents, I would not shout or cry. I would let the proof speak loud and clear for me. Honestly, when my parents finally came home, it was earlier than anyone expected. I heard the sound of the car pulling into the driveway and felt my chest tighten. I had been waiting for this moment for weeks, but I hadn't thought it would come so soon. Clint and Sierra rushed to the door to greet them, their voices suddenly sweet and full of excitement. From the basement, I could hear them laughing and telling stories as if everything had been perfect while Mom and Dad were away. I came upstairs slowly, unsure of what would happen next. My parents looked tired from their long trip, but happy to be back. Before I could even hug them properly, Sierra jumped in, saying how hard it had been to manage the house with me there. Her voice dripped with false concern, like she was only telling them because she cared. Clint nodded along, backing her up with exaggerated sighs. They didn't waste time trying to twist the story. Clint told my parents I barely helped with chores and spent most of my time hiding in the basement. Sierra acted out little scenes, pretending she had asked me to do something and I ignored her. She even pointed out random things around the house, like a magazine left on the counter or shoes by the door, claiming they were examples of me being irresponsible. The boldness of it made my stomach turn. They were so sure of themselves, so ready to make me look like the problem. Sierra even led my mom into the living room, showing a blanket tossed over a chair and whispering that I never cleaned up after myself. It was laughable, really, because I had been the one picking up after her and her friends for weeks. My parents' faces shifted as they listened. At first, they seemed concerned, glancing at me like they didn't know what to believe. Clint and Sierra kept piling on, their words tumbling out fast, trying to fill every silence with their version of events. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, not from shame but from holding myself back. I wanted to shout the truth right then, to call them out for every lie. But instead, I stayed quiet. I realized the more they talked, the more tangled their story became. Sierra's examples contradicted each other, and Clint exaggerated so much it sounded rehearsed. The calm silence I kept only made their voices sharper, more desperate. They wanted me to defend myself, to get flustered and emotional, so I would look guilty. By refusing to react, I was letting them dig their own hole deeper and deeper. Mom looked tired listening to them, her eyes narrowing as Sierra waved her hands dramatically. Dad crossed his arms, his jaw tightening in a way I had seen before when he was losing patience. They weren't completely convinced yet, but I could sense doubt growing. So I stood there, quiet and steady, knowing my time hadn't come yet. I didn't need to argue now. I had everything I needed saved away, and the moment to reveal it all was getting closer. For now, silence was my best weapon, and I used it. Dinner that night was tense from the start. My parents had just come back, and we all sat around the table trying to share a meal together. I kept quiet, cutting my food slowly, while Clint and Sierra talked as if nothing had ever been wrong. They laughed loudly, told stories, and acted like they were the perfect couple holding everything together. But I could see the nervous flicker in Sierra's eyes each time she glanced at me. She knew I was waiting. Halfway through the meal, Clint put down his fork and cleared his throat. His voice grew serious as he told my parents it was time to make a decision about the house. He said I was old enough to move out and that it would be better for everyone if I left. Sierra jumped in, nodding along, adding that I was lazy and disrespectful, and that I had no right to keep living there when they were contributing so much. They made it sound like I was a burden standing in the way of their plans. For a moment, the room was quiet. My parents looked torn, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and pressed play. The first recording filled the room. Sierra's voice, sharp and cruel, ordering me to clean and mocking me like I was beneath her. The words were so harsh they echoed off the walls. My parents froze, their forks halfway to their mouths. I let one clip finish, then played another, this one of Sierra calling me a useless freeloader and threatening to have me kicked out. After that, I pulled out the stack of printed photos I had been hiding. Each one showed the house after one of their parties. Dirty plates, bottles, crumbs, and spills everywhere. I placed them on the table, one by one, showing the truth. Finally, I set down the copied documents I had gathered, the bank withdrawals and fake house maintenance expenses Clint and Sierra had been taking. My father picked up the papers, his eyes scanning the numbers, his face growing darker with every line he read. My mother looked at me, then back at Clint, her expression full of hurt and disbelief. The silence was heavy until my dad finally spoke, his voice sharp with anger. He asked Clint how he could steal from his own parents and lie about his own sister. My mom shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. She whispered that she couldn't believe her son would betray his family like this. Sierra tried to laugh it off, saying the recordings were taken out of context and the papers were mistakes. But her voice shook, and my parents weren't buying it. The evidence was too clear, too strong. Clint tried to defend himself, but every word only made him look guiltier. The truth was laid out on the table, undeniable. That night, the lies crumbled, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel invisible. My parents finally saw the real story, and Clint and Sierra couldn't hide anymore. As soon as the evidence was laid out, my parents knew enough. Without another word, they told Clint and Sierra to pack their things and leave the house immediately. I watched silently as their confident, controlling faces began to crumble. Clint's eyes blazed with anger, and Sierra's smug smile faltered, revealing a side of her I hadn't seen before, cold and bitter. Clint turned toward me, his face red, and shouted, calling me vindictive and pathetic. He accused me of setting him up and ruining his life. I didn't respond. I simply met his glare with silence, letting his words fall flat. He was desperate to twist the story, but the truth was already clear. His yelling did nothing except show how powerless he was now. Sierra, on the other hand, couldn't keep up her act any longer. Her voice, once sweet and sarcastic, grew sharp and cruel. She snapped at me, insulting me directly, no longer pretending it was a joke. It was almost frightening how different she looked without the mask she had carefully worn for weeks. In that moment, I realized how much they had relied on appearances and manipulation to control everyone around them. My parents stepped in firmly. My dad's voice was steady, cold, and final. He told them that the lies, the manipulation, and the theft were unacceptable and that there would be consequences. My mom, usually soft-spoken, supported him completely, looking directly at Clint and Sierra with disappointment and hurt. It was the first time in weeks that I felt truly seen and supported in my own home. Their support made the anger and shame radiating from Clint and Sierra even more obvious. They packed their things quickly, throwing some items into bags and leaving others behind in a rush. The tension in the air was thick. Clint muttered threats under his breath, blaming me for everything, but I ignored him. Sierra's face twisted in frustration as she realized that her charm and lies had no effect anymore. Their relationship, once so united in manipulation, was cracking under pressure. They argued quietly as they moved toward the door, blaming each other, revealing cracks that had been there all along. Finally, they left. The front door slammed, leaving the house strangely quiet. I sat down for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the relief wash over me. The weight of weeks of stress, humiliation, and betrayal began to lift. The house, my home, felt normal again, even if the memory of what had happened would take longer to fade. My parents came over and hugged me tightly, apologizing for not seeing the truth sooner. I could see the sorrow in their eyes for what I had endured, but also pride for the way I had handled myself. Clint and Sierra were gone, left to deal with the consequences of their own actions. Their relationship weakened and their control shattered. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe in my own home. The people who were supposed to protect me were finally on my side, and the people who had tried to hurt me were gone. It was a victory that didn't need celebration. The truth had come out, and justice, quiet but clear, had been served. After Clint and Sierra left, the house finally felt like mine again. I walked through each room slowly, taking in the familiar sights and sounds. The quiet was soothing, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel tense or on edge. I moved my things back upstairs and set up my room the way I wanted. It felt good to have my own space again, a place where I could think, relax, and plan for the future without anyone trying to control me. I started focusing on nursing school, opening my books and organizing my notes. It was the first real time in months that I could work toward my goals without constant interruptions or ridicule. I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't realized I had missed until now. Preparing for school became more than studying. It was reclaiming my life, proving to myself that I could succeed on my own terms. My parents were supportive in ways they hadn't been before. They apologized deeply for not believing me sooner and for letting Clint and Sierra manipulate them. Their regret was sincere, and I could see they were learning from the experience. They promised to be more attentive, to trust my words, and to protect me in ways they hadn't before. The apologies weren't just words. They were the start of repairing the trust that had been broken. Months passed, and life began to return to normal. I focused on my work, my school, and rebuilding the peaceful life I had lost. Occasionally, I heard through friends or social media that Clint and Sierra were struggling. They were moving from one place to another, trying to make ends meet, facing the consequences of their own choices. Part of me felt satisfaction, not because I wanted them to suffer, but because it was proof that their schemes had failed. They had tried to take my home, my comfort, and my dignity, and in the end, it backfired. I didn't celebrate or gloat. There was no joy in watching someone else's life fall apart. The real victory was in knowing that justice had played out. I had stayed calm, collected my evidence, and let the truth speak for itself. That was enough. I felt strong, capable, and in control of my own life, and nothing Clint and Sierra did could take that away from me. Sitting in the living room one evening, I looked around at the house filled with quiet and peace. I felt grateful for my parents, for the life I had, and for the lessons I had learned. I thought about how far I had come, how much I had endured, and how I had protected myself without losing my dignity. They wanted me gone from the only home I had. Instead, they lost everything. And I don't feel sorry for them, not one bit. Hi friends. Thanks so much for sticking with me through this story. Don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit that subscribe button for more real-life stories. See you next time.